Good evening, folks, and welcome to the gorgeous Arlington Theatre for what is going to be a very memorable evening with Deepak Chopra. I'm Catherine Raymock with K-Light 101.7, and we are proud to be one of the many sponsors bringing Deepak here. We would like to just pause and thank our sponsors, our major sponsor, Men's Wearhouse, and also many of the sponsors that you saw earlier on the screen as well. We'd also like to thank our volunteers, all of them that made this happen, and our volunteer artists as well. So thank you very much. Okay, beautiful. I'm just going to go off script just a little bit before I introduce this next man to tell you that we just re-met, but I met this man. I was on a commuter flight from Santa Barbara to LA and going somewhere else about 7 years ago, and we happened to be sitting next to each other. And I was fascinated by him, and we struck up a conversation about radio at the time, and he had all these brilliant ideas, and he invited me, he and his wife invited me to their lovely home in Ojai, and we sat for a couple of hours and talked about the changing industry of radio. And really before it started to change the way it is today, this man saw what was happening, and I was fascinated then. And so it's been nice to reconnect with him. He is here to introduce our guest of honor tonight. So please help me to welcome a man who is the founding president of the World Business Academy. He is also a successful entrepreneur, to say the least, executive. He is an author and also a leading keynote speaker. He has been for over 25 years, widely recognized as a practical visionary and a futurist. Please welcome Rinaldo Brutoco.
Well, thank you all for coming. It's just a delight to be here tonight. This is kind of an interesting combination evening, and you know who I'm about to introduce, so I'll get to that in a second. We've had some really interesting events the last couple of days, and our goal for tonight was to do an exercise in what we're calling applied consciousness. So you had a little meditative experience. Our hope microphone, there we go. Our hope is that the microphone doesn't stop again. Our hope is that what you will experience tonight is a way to hold that deep stillness that Deepak was speaking to in a new way when you leave tonight. See, when you take the deep stillness of awareness and you make from it a plan of direct self-actualized action in the world, miracles happen. So it's a great pleasure to introduce someone who I met 25 years ago through a mutual friend at dinner, who then became a fellow of the World Business Academy about 20 years ago. We've been in an extremely close friendship ever since. I've also have the privilege of, besides being president of the Academy, I'm also president of the Chopra Foundation, and I hope you'll be interested in learning more tonight about both the Academy and the Chopra Foundation. And in that 20 years of knowing Deepak and being fascinated by how unified his consciousness is, and as you'll see, the person you've seen on television, the person you've read about with his 75 books, is actually the same person who'll be on the stage in a moment. There is no different Deepak. There's only one. And part of that message for us tonight is this. In the 20 years I've known him, and we've been very good friends, I've never really thought until just this evening, this is truly the moment for precisely this man to be with us. This is a time when human consciousness is about to express itself in a whole new way. The challenges we face and the opportunities in front of us are literally beyond your imagination, and we're capable of it. So we're going to do a little introduction now of Deepak, who will be joining me out here, and as soon as he's spoken for a bit, We're going to show one more video, and there's another man in the audience named Louis Strasberg who did the visuals, an award-winning film and cinematographer, and he, together with Gary, did the next video you'll see. I can't see Louis from here, but the next video you'll see is both Louis and Gary. Gary and Louis are creating an art form. It's a new form of communication, which is to help people touch with resonance the emotion of what we want to implement in the world, rather than just the intellectual content. So my hope is that with Deepak joining me out here now, Deepak, are you here? He will materialize in a moment. My dear, dear friend, Deepak Chopra.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So I thought I'd start the evening with a little story from 2 years ago. First of all, how's everyone? All good? Thanks. Thank you. So about 2 years ago, I wrote this book. It's called God, A Story of Revelation. And it tracks the history of how human beings have thought about the mystery of existence. And for lack of a better word, it's the highest instinct to know ourselves. We wonder why we are here on earth, what is the purpose of our existence, what is the meaning of death, does God exist, do we have a soul, what happens to us after we die. So this was the process I was going through when I wrote the book. And it's about 10 people. It starts with Job in the Old Testament, and then moves on to St. Paul, who had the revelation experience on the road to Damascus, and then moves through some Christian saints and Sufis like Rumi, and then ends with a conversation between Einstein and Tagore in the 1950s. Earlier, 1930s. So it's really a history of revelation, how human beings wonder about the big questions of existence. So I was on a tour with this book, and I arrived in Los Angeles as part of it, and I was picked up by my grandson, who was then 5 years. He's now 6, a little over 6, 6.5. And my son. And as we were getting out of the airport, he looks at me and he says, Dada, which is the Indian word for grandfather on the father's side. He said, what is dark energy? So it's an interesting question from a 5-year-old. I said, what do you know about dark energy? And he said, it flows through the night sky. Which is a beautiful description, actually. I said, what else do you know about it? He said, it's 70% of the universe, which is, I don't know how many of you know that. Then we got into the car, and we were driving by Santa Monica, and we were going past the ocean. I rolled the window down. He looks outside, and he says, how did they make the ocean? I said, who make the ocean? He said, they. I said, no, that's not a scientific way of asking questions. You have to be precise. What do you mean by they? So he thinks for a little bit. Then he reframed the question. He said, how did the ocean get made? So I said, well, it got made the same way as the Earth. A big star exploded. And now we have something called the solar system. And I said, do you know how many planets there are in the solar system? He said, well, if you count Pluto, there are 9. So I'm wondering, who's this kid? I'm thinking, what the heck is going on? He says, if you count Pluto, there are 9, otherwise there are 8. Because a lot of people think that Pluto is not really a planet. It's too small. So I said, okay, so where did the solar system come from? He said, from the galaxy? I said, yeah, that's pretty good. what's the name of the galaxy? He said, Milky Way. I said, that's pretty good too. So where did the Milky Way galaxy come from? He said, from the universe. I said, yeah. Where did the universe come from? He said, from another dimension. So by now I'm totally taken with this kid. I said, you know, in India we always think everything recycles, so I'm thinking, who's recycling here? You know, Galileo, whatever. You know, I said, how do you know all this? He said, it's on my Pokemon. Okay. So I shared this story for two reasons. One of them, of course, is if you don't know what's happening on Pokemon, you're not part of the zeitgeist at the moment. You better get caught up with the collective consciousness. And the second reason I share this story is because what this little boy was addressing was the most fundamental question in science today. And that is, what's the nature of the universe? What's it made of? And the reason this is such an interesting question that people have been asking for a long time, but now, you know, we have things like telescopes and Hubble and James Watson, and you have the Hadron Collider in Geneva, and everybody's talking about the God particle and, you know, the Big Bang and so on. But actually, this question is unanswered as far as science is concerned. 70% of the universe is indeed dark energy, and we have no idea what it is. It's ripping space apart faster than the speed of light. And there's something called the cosmic horizon, which is about 47 billion light years away from us. And galaxies upon galaxies are tumbling across that, as I said, faster than the speed of light, into not the unknown, but the unknowable. Because by the time light comes from there to here, our universe, our part of the universe will have exhausted its thermonuclear energy and become the heat death of absolute zero. And so it's the unknowable. And of the remaining 30%, 25% is dark matter, and we have no idea what that is. It's some invisible matter that bends space-time in the same way as regular matter, and therefore it's responsible for most of the gravity in a galaxy. It holds galaxies together, and the solar system, and you and me. If we didn't have this mysterious force, our bodies would fall apart, and everything would actually dissipate completely. So only 4% of the universe is atomic, which means everything that we know that's made up of atoms. Atoms reflect light, absorb light, emit light, and you and I are made up of atoms. And so is everything else. You know, this microphone and our body and the food we eat is made up of atoms, and these atoms, in turn, were made in the crucible of stars and galaxies. But when you start to look at these atoms, most of it is interstellar dust, which is invisible also. So the visible universe, which includes hundreds of billions of galaxies, and today we are told at least 300 habitable planets in our own galaxy, and then literally billions and billions of stars and trillions of planetary systems. All of that is 0.01% of what exists out there. So the rest is either unknown or unknowable. Now this 0.01% of what we call the visible universe, which is made up of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and the elements of the periodic table, is also your body. And so your body is stardust, and when we start to look at that, We see these atoms are made up of subatomic particles, and these particles are basically not material things. These particles are probability waves, that is, are coming out of nothing. When you leave these particles alone, if you leave a particle alone, if you don't watch it, or if it's not interacting with other particles, it disappears. And it becomes a possibility wave. Where? So if you go beyond the appearance of molecules, you end up in a subatomic cloud. You go beyond the cloud, there's nothing. And the big question now, science says, everything seems to be nothing. And what is the nature of this nothing? Is it just an empty void, or could it be the womb of creation? What is the nature of the nothingness from where we come? And the great Sufi poet Rumi, whom I love, said, we come out of nothingness scattering stars like dust. He said, look at these worlds spinning out of nothingness. This is you. So who are we? We are actually stardust beings that come from that stillness, which is nothing, and that nothing is our own consciousness. And in fact, the answer to the question, what's the stuff of the universe, is that the stuff of the universe is consciousness. And consciousness permeates the universe from atom to galaxy. Consciousness is a field of infinite possibilities. Consciousness is a field of infinite creativity. Consciousness is what connects everything in the universe with everything else. And consciousness takes leaps of creativity and evolution. And the universe is evolving, but so are we. So Rumi again, in one of his poems, he says, consciousness sleeps in minerals, it dreams in plants, it starts to wake up in animals, and it becomes self-aware in human beings. I would modify that and say it becomes self-aware in some human beings. Okay? And this is where we are in our evolution. Our evolution on a cosmic scale has been going on for 13.8 billion years. And we are an interesting species because our consciousness, because unlike other animals, at least on our planet, our consciousness is not only giving us self-awareness, but it gives us choice. It gives us what we call free will. So if you again talk to people who understand consciousness, you say, do we have free will or don't we have free will? There's a lot of controversy about this, but at least the insights we have from quantum physics say that if we go to the deepest level of our being, then we have infinite freedom, infinite creativity, and infinite choice. But most people do not behave as if they had that. Most people behave as if they didn't have that. They're deterministic. They're like bundles of conditioned reflexes and nerves that are constantly being triggered by people and circumstance. And that's because our mind is conditioned by culture, our mind is conditioned by religion, our mind is conditioned by history, our mind is conditioned by economics, and so we are constantly under the hypnosis of social conditioning, or cultural, religious, whatever, but the conditioned mind is also called the separate mind. The conditioned mind says, I'm separate from you. But if we go beyond all the conditionings, all the labels, all the definitions, and beyond all the things we have attached our identity to. We have so many levels of identity. I'm Deepak Chopra. I'm Indian American. I'm a physician. I am a writer. These are all labels that my consciousness has attached itself to. if I take away all these labels, what's left is pure consciousness. And at that level, there's no separation. There's no separation in space or time. So every experience that we have perceptually is experience that comes from a perceptual artifact. And that is, we are separate from each other. We are separate from the universe. And unfortunately, our science is built on that. You know, science is built on what is called a subject-object split. It's me and the universe. It's me and you. But that's not how nature works. Nature is one. Space-time, energy, matter, it's all the same thing. At the deepest level, it's one stuff. Of course, it's not stuff, it's non-stuff. And not only is it non-stuff, it's thinking non-stuff. You know, and as it interacts with itself, it creates all the stuff that we call. So going back to Rumi, he says, you're not just a drop in the ocean, you're the mighty ocean in the drop. So as you go deep inside your own being, you end up with the ground of all existence. And that's a very ancient idea in Eastern wisdom traditions. Atman is Brahman. Atman is the ground of our being, soul, if you will. You saw that little video which Gary Malkin did. It's beautiful. But try it right now. As you're listening to me, just turn your attention to who's listening. So as you're listening to me, become aware of the listener. And that presence that you feel right now, that's your soul. It's not your mind which might be saying, I wish I'd gone to the bathroom before the lecture, or whatever. That presence, which is your soul, it's an awareness. And awareness is a common ground of all being. This awareness is a non-local. Non-local means it has no one location. It's non-local. It permeates all of space-time, and it's one. Perceptions are many, but awareness is one. Perceptions for animals are different. You don't know how a dolphin perceives the world, or a mosquito, or another species. You go beyond the different species-specific, culture-specific, conditioned perceptions. You get to the ground of all existence, it's one. And that, when we experience that, when I'm there, when you're there, then we're in the same place. And it's not a place, because it transcends space-time. Space-time are in awareness. Where do we experience space-time? In awareness. So everything that we call so-called reality, perceptions, thoughts, feelings, emotions, images, and physical reality, personal relationships, social interactions, the universe, they're all differentiated aspects of a single being. Whether we want to call that being God, or infinite consciousness, or cosmic consciousness, doesn't matter. Those are words. But you go deep enough into your own being, you are in touch with all being. And in that all being is the experience, is the loss of fear of death. It's the field of transcendence. Transcendence means going beyond the superficial experience of the world. So if you look at, again, going back to my book, God, the Story of Revelation, I looked at every single experience of revelation, whether it's in Christianity, Buddhism, whatever, Einstein. In the end, you know, Einstein is famous for saying, I want to know how God thinks, everything else is a detail. So if you look at all these different revelatory experiences, they have the following common experiences. Number one, transcendence. Transcendence means going beyond space and time. experiencing your essence, which is the essence of everything, the stuff of the universe. It's one stuff. Number two, as a result of that experience of transcendence, the emergence of Platonic values. We call them Platonic because named after Plato, Western philosopher. He was one of the earlier ones, but this has been part of every tradition. So what are Platonic values? They are truth, goodness, beauty, harmony, love, compassion, joy, equanimity, peace. So that's the second characteristic. These values emerge as a result of the experience of oneness. It's not an imposed morality. Imposed morality is actually quite annoying. You know, people say, you have to do this, you have to do this. H.G. Wells said, morality of that kind is just jealousy with a halo, okay? And it expresses itself as self-righteousness. I am more spiritual than you are, okay? And people go to war about it, actually. So there's an authentic experience of Platonic truth. And the third thing that is common to all these spiritual experiences is the loss of the fear of death. And then out of that experience, of course, you realize that all fear is the fear of the unknown. All fear is the fear of death in disguise. You know, you're hanging on to something because you don't want to go on to the next stage because you don't know what it is. But if you experience the deathless in you, then there's no fear of anything. And that leads to a very authentic state of being where you're coming from source, so to speak. And all the traditions of yoga have taught, you know, if you look at the word yoga, it literally means that. Yoga means union. It's the same as the English word yoke. In the New Testament, Jesus says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Okay, it's the state of flow, lightness of being, where you're connected to your own source, which is the source of everything else. So yoga, there's yoga of being, which is meditation, contemplative traditions. There's yoga of feeling, which is love, compassion, joy, equanimity, empathy. There's the yoga of knowledge, which is asking these big questions, not actually knowing the answers, being very comfortable in living the questions. If we live the questions, there's something very interesting about consciousness, that it reveals the answers to you. That's actually what revelation is to ask and to receive. Ask and you shall receive. But you ask in the stillness of your own being. And that's the yoga of knowledge. And then there's finally the yoga of doing, which is called karma yoga. So there's Raj yoga, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, and karma yoga in that sequence. And the reason we're here tonight is to see how does that change our life. How does it make us healthier? When we feel connected, our bodies spontaneously, and this is new information that we're learning, it's called epigenetics, which means that our genes are actually responding to our life experiences. Every life experience you have triggers a certain behavior of your genes. So if you're feeling disconnected, if you're feeling guilt, shame, mistrust, or anger, or hostility, and disconnected from life, your genes express themselves in a way that causes inflammation in the body. If you're feeling connected, then your genes express themselves in a way that causes homeostasis or self-regulation. So our genes are not fixed, our bodies are not fixed, even our cellular aging at the most fundamental levels is determined by a state of consciousness. And these great traditions tell us that most people will go through life in 3 stages of consciousness: waking, dreaming, and sleeping. And then it's over. But today there's something that is called an awakening that's happening in the collective consciousness, where people are recognizing that beyond waking, dreaming, and sleeping, there are states of consciousness called soul consciousness, divine consciousness, cosmic consciousness, unity consciousness. And the interesting thing is we can actually study the human brain and genes in the body as our consciousness evolves. So as our consciousness evolves, there's the experience of Platonic truth, there's more creativity, there is more synchronicity because we are connected with everything that exists. There is leaps of evolution that affect our brain, our biology, and at our center, at the Chopra Foundation now, we're looking at these states of consciousness. We're looking at gene expression and how the brain changes and how the body changes. And how, as a result of that, we develop a different relationship with the universe. So right now, the words that we use, the words themselves separate us. So we say me and the universe, but actually you are the universe. You know, you are stardust. So why aren't you the universe? Why aren't those trees your lungs? If those trees didn't breathe, would you be able to breathe? If you didn't breathe, would the tree be able to breathe? We call it a tree, but it's also you. The rivers and waters are your circulation. You contaminate that, you contaminate your circulation. The earth is recycling as your body, physical body. And this air is our breath. And we share this breath. We share the molecules of our body are recycling through the entire ecosystem. You have 1 million atoms right now in your body that were once in the body of Jesus Christ or Genghis Khan or anyone else you want to think about. In just the last 3 weeks, 1 quadrillion atoms have gone through your body that have gone through the body of every other species on our planet. So think of a tree in Africa, think of a squirrel in Siberia, think of a peasant in China, think of a taxi driver in Calcutta. You have stuff in your body that was there 3 weeks ago. And in 1 year, you recycle your entire body. Entire body. This body I'm using right now to speak to you is my year 2014 model. And the last time I came to Santa Barbara, I brought the same suitcase, but not the same physical body. Because my suitcase has a longer shelf life. Okay. We are the universe recycling as Deepak and Michael and whoever. And the deeper we go into this, our sense of identity becomes big. We're not confined to our bodies anymore. Our bodies are in our consciousness. Our mind is in our consciousness. The entire universe is on our consciousness. And the more we expand our sense of self, the more we are able to heal ourselves, and the more we are able to heal each other, and we are able to heal the universe, which is in a crisis right now because of war, of eco-destruction, of climate change, economic disparities. We do not have a peaceful, just, sustainable, healthy, happy world right now because we have separated ourselves from reality. When we have this spiritual shift, only when a critical mass of people have this spiritual shift, will we be able to actually heal ourselves and heal the world. The word healing is very interesting. It means a return to wholeness. Healing, holy, wholeness, health is the same word. We have the data now to know what it will take. Social well-being, physical well-being, emotional well-being, spiritual well-being, community well-being, financial well-being, and career well-being are all inseparable. And you can quantify this. We do that now at Gallup organization where I work as a senior scientist. And once you start to quantify this, you realize that your well-being, your personal well-being, because you're a unit of consciousness and the universe is consciousness, your personal well-being and our collective well-being influences everything from traffic accidents to hospital admissions to crime rate to social unrest to the quality of leadership. as we begin to understand this, and we share this, by the way, we as an organization have shared this information with the State Department, with governments, and we watch the well-being of places like Syria and Libya and Afghanistan, and we know what's going to happen in a few months. We predict that what's going to happen when their well-being decreases. The most important thing we can do for ourselves and for the rest of the world is increase the capacity of everyone for health, happiness, and well-being. In fact, the best way to get rid of your enemies, is to increase their capacity for health, happiness, and well-being. It's the only way. And we now, as I said, because of social networks, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and everything that's emerging right now that is causing huge changes in the world, the Arab Spring, what's happening in Venezuela, what happened yesterday in Turkey, within 24 hours, things change, okay? Because we can no longer see ourselves even as members of one community or one country or one continent. We are citizens of the globe, and ultimately we're citizens of the cosmos. So this is a really great time for us to make that choice. Go one way, and we risk our extinction and 13.8 billion years of evolution wasted. And you go the other way, and we become the evolutionary impulse of the cosmos. There's a lot more to say, but for now, thank you.
Boy, it's awfully bright up here. So here's the introduction to the second act. What you had a chance to hear earlier was one of the great metaphysicians, a doctor, an author, an incredibly gifted physicist, a cosmologist. But most of all, what you had a chance to hear was what an integrated body, mind, and soul sounds like when it's just trying to relate to what we are all about. What we tried to do with this video, and I want to thank Gary Malkin and Louis Strasberg again for that incredible gift. Thank you very much. It's the best I've ever sounded. The reason for bringing people like Deepak Chopra here tonight is severalfold. First of all, we're going to take and have some conversation here in a moment. Some of you have heard about my profound appreciation and respect for the community of Santa Barbara. At a time that you look at the challenges we are all facing, it's remarkable that we get to live in such an extraordinary place. We have an unbelievable climate. We have an unbelievably well-educated community. We have an extraordinary university at our doorstep. We have arts. Most importantly, we have each other. An extraordinary community. And from this community, you might think only very small insular things could occur, because after all, it's just a small little part of a bigger thing of 38 million people called California. And that's part of a bigger thing of 330 million people called the United States of America. And that's part of a bigger thing with 7.3 billion people called the planet Earth today. But here's what I'd like you to think about and hold in your hearts, in your minds, and in your souls. What if Santa Barbara was the equivalent of Athens in the age of Pericles, the Golden Age? What if that's who we are, the citizens of Athens, who need to step forward and take responsibility for a planet that we can change, because we start to change our consciousness in such a way that the world changes around us? when you get to hang around with Deepak and some other really wonderful people we'll be bringing to Santa Barbara, one of the things you get to really appreciate quickly is how there are no partial solutions to the scope of challenges we face. So it's really critical that we tend to look at the possibility of a new level of consciousness emerging where these problems can no longer exist because they simply don't fit. Almost as the Berlin Wall fell simply because it no longer was relevant. So if we think we can solve the problems with the same kind of mentality that got us into them, Einstein has warned us that's not possible, right? So it's a shift of consciousness we need to make. What the World Business Academy has been doing for 27 years now is helping the business organizations and leaders quietly behind closed doors begin to perceive the shift that they absolutely must make. We have 3 missions in the Academy. The first one is to shift the consciousness of existing business leadership from that of a predator to that of a steward. Because you act differently if you think you're responsible. The second part of the tripartite mission, by the way, this has been there from day one, hasn't changed in 27 years. The second part of it is to shift the consciousness of young people, particularly young people going into business, so they see themselves as entering a noble profession rather than a jungle. You act differently in the temple than you do the jungle. Think about it. What if everybody went to work and then as they got dressed to go to work in whatever garb they were garbing for the temple, not for battle? Third part of the mission is to shift the consciousness of the public at large. That's all of us. So we begin to put our money where our deeper values are. And when we do that, business will shift on a dime. I was delighted in the State of the Union, for the first time in the years I've been watching the State of the Union address by any president. This year, for the first time, I heard a company's name mentioned, Costco. And it was mentioned because the president wanted to acknowledge that some companies actually take care of their customers, take care of their employees, most importantly, and take care of each other. I thought it was amazing that he said that because you know what? The last time you turned on TV, you did not see a Costco commercial, and yet they're very successful. And they're successful because we all know that that's what they're doing. I won't mention the other company. Now, the reason I'm sharing that with you tonight is simply this. When you think of consciousness in the broadest possible way, the way Deepak holds it, and he does this thing called Sages and Scientists. I want to put in a plug. Any of you who haven't heard about it, go look up on the Chopra Foundation website, the Chopra website, and you'll see Sages and Scientists. It's the best meeting that Deepak does all year, he would say, and I think it's extraordinary. I urge you to go. It's some of the most brilliant minds on the planet who assemble to have a lot of fun with music and conversation, and it's quite mind-blowing. It's at La Costa, just down the road here in North San Diego County. And I'm privileged, he often asks me to speak there, and this year I gave a little talk. It was on climate change, which some of you know I'm very involved in. And after the talk was over, the fellow who followed me up next was a guy named David Gershon. If you go to our website today, worldbusiness.org, you'll see David's picture. And David followed me as the next talk, and Deepak grabs me about 2/3 of the way through David's speech, and he says, you know, if you could take what David does, which is shift consciousness block by block, and you could combine it, so that's sort of like from the bottom up, if you could combine it with what you do, Rinaldo, and the Academy does at the level of the Public Utilities Commission, shifting consciousness from the top down, if the two of you could do that, the Chopra Foundation could get involved and we could make this the largest single applied consciousness experiment in the history of the world. We could change the minds, the consciousness of 38 million Californians. And here's what he meant. So we have a thing called the Safe Energy Project at the Academy. And so he said, go figure it out. Talk to David, see if there's a way to put this together. But it's got to be some way we can combine shifting consciousness and what the Academy is doing to try and shift energy systems. So, okay. 2 days later, we had it all worked out, and we decided to launch it, and it's now officially called the California Moonshot Project. And for those of you who were at dinner last night, you heard Deepak said, oh, I don't do so much, I just introduce people to each other. and having been introduced a number of times with Deepak and his ideas, I've come to enjoy the power of his intuition. And even when he says something to me like, can't you get something to work with David Gershon on the top up, bottom down, make that happen? And I said, okay, if he's hearing it intuitively, it must be something worth pursuing. Because this is a guy who's so integrated that if he's got that in his mind, how can I help that happen? How can I implement it? So I'm going to make one announcement, and then I'm going to introduce Deepak, and we're going to have a little conversation about applied consciousness. We have a thing called the Safe Energy Project, and what it does is several things, including the California Moonshot, which I'll end with. So our Safe Energy Project, which some of you people know, after 20-some years of being very silent and working behind the scenes, we decided we couldn't take it any longer, so we decided to get involved, and we wanted to shut down the San Onofre nuclear power plant. Thank you. Thank you. And so, and not only were we the leading force in that activity, or one of the leading forces in that activity, with our friends at Friends of the Earth and some other environmental groups, we were the only business group that showed up. And I cannot tell you how I have been thanked by the commission and their staff, because we like to read reams of numbers. We like to understand balance sheets, P&Ls, and cash flows. And nobody else seemed to want to look at that stuff, and that was the way we closed the plant. It didn't pencil. It fundamentally didn't pencil. And there was no way to make it pencil. And after we got the plant closed last June, the utility, Southern California Edison, continued to charge us, you and me, all of us, every month, for a plant that was not generating energy since January 2012. Okay. Well, at that point, we said, this is crazy. We got to get the money back. But all the environmentalists went home. Really, they're friends of mine. But they went home because they had done their job. They thought, okay, we were against it environmentally. And our approach to the Academy is, wait a minute, if we don't change the economics, if they don't have to give the money back, what kind of a moral hazard is that when you let business get away with that stuff? So we went through a long process, and in January of this year, the administrative law judge who works for the commission hands down a decision and basically says, okay, we're going to keep the plant closed, and they shouldn't have done it, and yes, they broke the plant. And as a result, we're going to fine them $94 million, and we're going to give it back to the public. Well, it sounds good, except we said, that's terrible. By our calculation, they have stolen $1.5 billion. If you only take $94 million back, what did you just tell them? You just told them to go do it again. So you can't do that. You've got to stop this. And in an extremely unusual move, the commission agreed to hold the decision off. And they decided to instruct Edison to meet with us and see if we couldn't resolve it. And for some of you who heard the 6 o'clock local CBS News last night, it was announced officially. We've reached a settlement with Southern California Edison, where everybody in this room, because we're all Edison customers. Now remember, the Academy got no fee for this, not one penny. The settlement says that they will return $1.4 billion. That's a different level of consciousness. That's a consciousness that's got to get back to service, which is where business has to come from. So the Safe Energy Project had as its objectives, close San Onofre, see that the public gets its money back. We're still working, as you know, on closing Diablo Canyon, which we think has to close. We had our first ever fundraiser last December, and we said, if you folks will help us, we will do the first study that's ever been done in the history of the world where we will overlay cancer rates from a nuclear power plant across a diagram, and we will be able to identify by zip code who's going to die. We released that study on March 3rd at the University Club here in Santa Barbara, and we were able to prove conclusively that radioactive isotopes called strontium-90 that are slightly heavier than air, which are emitted every day just about from Diablo, legally admitted, are killing people between here and San Luis Obispo. Now, the good news and the bad news, for those of you sitting out here, we're 85, 90 miles downwind. They don't get this far. They stop at about 65 miles. If you're 15 miles from the plant, you should immediately move. However, we eat food that comes from up there. So it is still our business that those radioactive isotopes, strontium-90, they must stop being emitted. They must. And that's if we don't have an earthquake that takes and makes Diablo Canyon look like the new Fukushima. With regard to Fukushima, we also agreed to begin doing a nationwide study with Woods Hole Institute, where we are now uploading data that we'll be collecting every month here in Santa Barbara, across the country, of the sand on our beaches from Fukushima pollution. We have a sister organization that's going to be collecting kelp and water samples. We have a local physicist who's going to be supervising that study, and it will be starting any day now. So that's also part of the Safe Energy Project. But the part we're here to talk about tonight is the California Moonshot. So here's what the California Moonshot is. It's patterned after what President Kennedy said. Remember, he said, I'm going to take a man and send him to the moon and return him safely by the end of the decade. Remember that? 1961. And we did it. And when he said that, he had no idea whatsoever how we would do that. None. But he trusted that we could do it, which to everybody's mind at the time was an impossible feat. So we said, well, why don't we do something like this in California? Why don't we say that not within 30 or 40 or 50 years, but within 10 years or less, we're going to eliminate all fossil fuels, all nuclear fuels in the state of California, and we're going to do it without it costing one extra penny to the ratepayers. I'd like to see a show of hands. Who would like to get rid of all fossil fuels and nuclear fuels if it didn't cost you an extra penny? Thank you. Thank you very much. That's the reaction we get everywhere. So that's the California Moonshot, and that's what came out of Deepak Chopra's saying to me, can you please meet with David Gershon and see what you can work out? If you go to our website, to the worldbusiness.org, you'll get more details about that moonshot, and I'm happy to have you go learn about it and have you see where you can fit in. Tonight, what I'd like to do, though, is I'd like to bring my friend Deepak back out here, and I'd like to have a conversation with him. We're going to have you folks pass up the questions that you've been asking, and hope you've written them down. And what I'd like to do in this conversation is I'd like to have Deepak continue to push his awareness of what consciousness is capable of. And what I'm going to do occasionally, because he's really the star, and I'm just sort of like the backup act here, what I'd really like to do is have us see if we can't challenge ourselves as you listen to the next part of this conversation, the way this man has challenged me for 20 years. Can we challenge ourselves to have our consciousness be so different that the world we see around us is a different place just because we changed? That's the opportunity, that's the challenge, and I can't wait till we get started talking about it. So, Deepak, come on. Would you like to add anything to that, or no? Got some questions? Thanks so much for coming to Santa Barbara. I think his suitcase looks good, but I think he looks very good too, don't you? Even though his suitcase lasted longer. It's been 9 years since he was here. One of the questions, Deepak, in a world where there is so much war and violence, where there is so much strife, how is it, or what do you think is it about changing our consciousness that gives us the ability to overcome this degree of negativity, resistance, what have you?
So the world is, of course, a projection of our collective consciousness. So you can't think of the world as separate from us. So you go back to the famous saying from Mahatma Gandhi, can you be the change you want to see in the world? Because if you can't be that change, then the world is not going to shift. Peace can only be created by those who are peaceful, not by peace Nobel laureates who have miserable lives. Okay? Love can only be shown by those who know how to love. So there's no social transformation in the absence of personal transformation. The biggest contribution you can make to the world is your own transformation. Now, it turns out that we have a global brain that's evolving through our social networks. So the key right now is for yourself to be a happy, healthy person, and then connect with other happy, healthy people, and then create that pandemic of happiness in the world that will solve these big problems. Otherwise, we're just using usual reductionist methods that don't work. You have to change, make a commitment. I am going to be healthy physically. I'm going to have healthy relationships. I'm going to cultivate empathy and compassion. I'm going to live the big questions. I'm going to do something every day that's not about me.
Someone asked, what does Deepak have to do with the World Business Academy? And the answer, which is kind of humorous, when we first met, we met because Deepak understands in a way very few people do who are as successful as he is in the world of ideas and letters, how important it is to get business to shift. So Deepak is one of approximately 100 fellows of the World Business Academy, and I'm delighted that he has cared enough over all these years to try and want to help us change our consciousness as business people. I think that's why you're in the Academy, Deepak. Do you want to add anything to that?
You could talk about just capital.
Okay.
Yeah.
You want to?
No, you should.
Okay. So another one of his ideas, I got to warn you, you hang around with him, but there's a lot of things, a lot of trouble you can get into. So Deepak came up with this idea about 2 years ago. And he said, what would happen if you could shift the consciousness of Wall Street? Well, that's, some would call, that's dealing with the belly of the beast, so to speak. And I said, well, that's an interesting question. I mean, the whole world would be different if you could shift the consciousness of Wall Street. So he said, so I want to talk, and then actually that was the year he sent me up and said, talk about just capital. That was an interesting year. So I said, well, we're not ready. We haven't figured it out. He said, no, just we'll talk about it. And I like to put people together and we'll find a way to shift the consciousness of Wall Street. We'll just talk about it. So he did. I did. And he introduced me to some people he started collecting along the way over the last 2 years. And one of them, this fellow named Paul Tudor Jones, who some of you may have heard of or read about. He's the number 150 wealthiest person on the planet. So he's extremely a very successful, self-made mega billionaire. He started a foundation 25 years ago called the Robin Hood Foundation in New York City. And that foundation is, I think, the largest annual donor to various services in New York. Last year, he raised $57 million in one night. It's quite a party to go to. So Deepak put Paul Tudor Jones, and we have a mutual friend who he's actually known longer than I have. I've only known her about 20 years. He's known her longer, Arianna Huffington, and some other, Ray Chambers, who's an Undersecretary of the United Nations, and some Paul Ciala, who's a member of our board at the foundation, and some other really incredible people. And we started this conversation, and it is now morphed. And Just Capital exists. It is a corporation. It started formally operating about 7 months ago. It's raised about $1 million already. It's begun hiring staff. It's working at a joint venture with the Gallup organization to be able tracking what people in America initially think constitutes a just business enterprise. What is just capital? And this organization, which started with his initial idea of shifting the consciousness of Wall Street, now has 4 objectives. And they are, number 1, shift the consciousness of Wall Street. Change the metrics that they bank on in order to make money. Because if we can change what they're measuring, it'll change what their conduct is. Number 2, change what the executives in larger corporations particularly see as the way to achieve success that Wall Street would honor. Number 3, change the politicians or the political sector to expect something different from changed executives and changed Wall Street. And number 4, change the public so that the public would help us drive that change, because it's truly from all of our consciousness shifting that consciousness will shift. I'm going to say one other thing about it. And I sat there at a meeting with Deepak recently where the fellow who runs the Robin Hood Foundation was sitting at the end of the table, and Tudor Jones looked down the table and looked at Deepak and he said, you know, I think this just capital, this is going to be my legacy. He owns the change now. That's really an incredible statement. And there's the guy running the Robin Hood Foundation for all these years sitting at the other end of the table. And what Tudor Jones was saying, in effect, is when you shift consciousness at that level, it's even bigger than raising $57 million in one night to help the city of New York. Just thought I'd share that story with you. Nothing to say? See, that's what he does. He starts these things. Okay. I'll go to the next one. How do we deal with the impact on our bodies when we're trying to elevate our consciousness of Monsanto's GMOs and the pesticides, food, air, and quality of water issues? How do we deal with that if we're shifting our consciousness?
Yeah, it's a very important question, because the ecosystem is, of course, recycling is our body. So there's a lot of contamination in the ecosystem. GMO foods are actually destroying the ecosystem. As a person, you can make a decision not to eat anything that's manufactured, processed, or has contaminants, and focus mostly on food that you can, if possible, get from a farmer's market. So processed, manufactured, and high sugar food is the worst thing you can do. Try not to eat anything that comes in a can or has a label.
Or an ingredient list that has more syllables than you can pronounce.
Say that again? Flunk foods. Flunk is frozen, leftovers, unnatural, and nuked.
The next question is, and I think you've already answered this one actually, but it seems like we're going to have to amplify it because this question was written after you spoke. How do we best impact others' consciousness?
You can't change another person's consciousness by telling them to change. In fact, the worst thing you can do is try and change another person. It's hard enough for you to change yourself when you want to change. Okay, so the only person you can work with is yourself, period. Now, having said that, in children there's a very interesting phenomenon. It's called mirror neurons. So children, at least before they are 5 years old, their neurons mirror your neurons. And children, even before they understand language, they totally understand body language. A baby will look at its mother and look at her eyes, and look at her posture, look at or listen to the tone of her voice. It's tone of voice, posture, eye movements, body language. that influences the emotional development of a baby. If the baby is feeling loved and cared for and just senses that through body language, it will have a very healthy limbic brain, which regulates everything that happens in our body is regulated by emotional brain. We know that now, for sure. Okay, so that's the best thing you can do for your children, is to be an example of love and compassion and joy and empathy and peace. And if that is reflected in your being, the baby will automatically grow up to be a healthy and happier person. Today we know a lot about what makes people happy. You know, since I'm here, I might as well share this with you. Now, social scientists have come up with what they call a happiness formula. Okay, and this is how it goes. H is equal to S plus C plus V. So H stands for happiness. S stands for the set point in your brain. And what's the set point in the brain? Unhappy people have a very low set point for happiness, and that means that no matter what the situation is, they'll complain, they'll condemn, they'll criticize, or they'll play the victim. Happy people will look at the same situation and say, what's the opportunity? So, you know, you have climate change, you have this, that, the other. It's not a problem, it's an opportunity now to create the Cool Cities Challenge or whatever we're doing. So a happy person says, no matter what the situation is, what's the opportunity? This is called the set point. And how do you change the set point? By asking yourself, any time you see a problem, you say, what's the opportunity? Number one. Second, meditation changes your set point. And asking yourselves questions changes your set point. What do I want? What's my purpose? Changes the set point. So meditation, asking yourselves what's the opportunity, etc., will change your set point. Second, that's 50% of your daily happiness experience comes from your set point. Second part of the formula is C. C stands for conditions of living. And this applies to economic conditions of living. So if you're extremely poor, of course, that leads to unhappiness, because you think about money all the time if you're poor. But if you're extremely rich, that doesn't guarantee that you'll be a happier person. In fact, there's one thing that the very poor and the very rich share in common. They think about money all the time. Okay? And that leads to happiness. And you know, if your purpose of making money is to make money, to make money, to make money, and not to enjoy your life, then you'll be an unhappy person. The data shows that if you win the lottery, you'll be very happy in the beginning. In about 6 months, your happiness will plateau, and then at the end of the year, you'll return to your set point, because you haven't changed. You know, in fact, in 5 years, you might be worse off because now that's become your identity. Set point determines only 10 to 12%, conditions of living, set point 50%, conditions of living 10 to 12%. So there's a big chunk, 40% of daily happiness experience. And that comes from the choices we make. It's the part of the formula called V. So H is equal to S plus C, conditions, and V. And there are two kinds of choices people make every day. One is for personal pleasure. So guess what's the number one choice for personal pleasure in the United States of America? Sex is number 3, actually. If it was number 1, we might be a better society. So, what is number 1? Anybody? Food is good for you guys. That's number 2. Food, alcohol, entertainment is number 2 all in one category. Shopping is the number 1 choice that people make in our country, and that's why we call each other consumers. It's a very ugly word to describe a stardust being with self-awareness. So, do these choices make us happy? The answer is yes, but the happiness lasts a few days after the experience, no matter what the experience is: sex, alcohol, good meal, watching a movie, etc. The choices that really make us happy are called choices that give us fulfillment. That's when you have meaning and purpose in your life, when you express your creativity, and when you make other people happy. So the fastest way to be happy is to make someone else happy. And you do that by giving them 3 things that begin with A. Attention, which means listening to them. Affection, which means telling them that you care about them. And appreciation, which means you notice something good about them, authentically. That's the happiness formula, and it actually works. You know, when people change their set point, when people recognize that money is important but not the only thing in life, and when they learn how to make other people happy.
This next one's a 2-part one, and then we're going to have one last one. There's a question. Have you ever read Robert Putnam's article about the effects of increasing diversity?
I have not.
Okay. And just so you'll know, Deepak was commenting a lot about what's the Americans like, basically, in shopping and food, sex, and et cetera. And one of the reasons he's, among his other skills, he's a senior scientist with the Gallup organization. And he basically has been working many, many years with Gallup on trying to help understand basically the social science part. Do you want to just say a few moments about that?
Well, there are 5 buckets that we study at Gallup. So the first is career well-being. Are you happy with what you do every day? Because if you're not, then that's going to lead to some kind of sickness in the future. But what's the environment at work? Does your supervisor or manager or whoever you report to, does he or she ignore you? If they ignore you, your rate of disengagement goes up by something like 45%. If they don't ignore you, but they criticize you, you get better. Your rate of disengagement goes down to 20% because you would rather be criticized than ignored. Now you're being noticed, okay? But if they notice a single strength that you have, then your rate of disengagement goes down to less than 1% and your health improves. So the calculation is that in the United States, disengaged workers and what are called actively disengaged means they come to work not only unhappy but with the intention of making other people unhappy. They cost the US economy about $300 billion a year. And so at Gallup, what we do is we find out what your strength is. You know, so for example, my strength, and you know, when you go to the Gallup offices, you wear your strengths on your sleeve, on a button. So my strengths are, I'm futuristic, I'm adaptable, I like to connect people, I maximize the use of my time and energy, and I'm strategic. That's all part of how I operate. But then I need people who are good at building relationships, who are good at execution. There are about 35 strengths that human beings have. And you can find out, by the way, you can go on their site and you can do your own strength finders. It costs you $5, $10, and you can see what your strengths are. And so what in a good career is what you do is you build a team, which is about 5 to 10 people, where everybody's complementing each other's strengths. And that's a great team. Great teams have shared vision, they know how to bond emotionally, and they complement strengths. So we actually help organizations do that, including our own organization. We use those methodologies. That's career well-being. Social well-being is, are your friends and family happy people? This is very important because if you have a happy friend, your happiness goes up by 15%. If your happy friend has a happy friend that you don't know, it goes up another 10%. And if the happy friend has a happy friend, whom you have no idea who this person is, it still goes up. Your happiness goes up. So when we first saw this data, it's very kind of confusing. How does the happiness of people that you don't know increase your happiness? There are 2 reasons for this. So when 2 people engage, let's say I engage with Rinaldo, my happiness is affected by all the people I'm in relationship with. His happiness is affected by all the people that he's in relationship with, and they have people in their lives, and their lives, and their lives. So actually, because we are part of an ecosystem, the happier the ecosystem is, the happier we'll be. And this extends all the way to your enemies. So this is Gallup research. But the deeper reality is that at the deepest level, we are all part of the same consciousness. So when that consciousness shifts in the direction of happiness, no matter where it is, we get happy. Okay, so one thing I do occasionally is on Twitter, I just send a message, make one person happy by giving them attention, affection, appreciation, or just send them an emoticon with a kiss or something, okay? And then tell them to send to 2 others, and they send to 2 others, and soon you have a few million people in the world actually feeling happy. And that changes things, you know, and there are now algorithms that will tell you very soon what's today Santa Barbara's happiness, what's today's, and then you can correlate that with what's happening in society. So that's social happiness. Then there's physical well-being, which is good sleep, exercise, meditation, healthy relationships, and trying to maintain a good weight and getting good sleep. There's community well-being, which means, are you participating in the well-being of your community? Do you volunteer, even 4 hours a week? That'll make a great difference in your life if you do, because you meet with other people who have shared ideas, and you make a difference in your community. And then there's financial well-being, which means you don't spend money that you haven't earned to buy things that you don't need to impress people that you don't like. Okay? So, now this does not deal with spiritual well-being, which is a big thing, you know. When we get old, we fear death, infirmity, you know, which is basically, for that you need a spiritual insight into your whole identity, which is beyond your body and your mind. It's your spirit. That's a whole different realm of happiness.
This will be the last one, and you kind of opened it really well because you're starting to answer it already. What should be our first step, and maybe it's an emoticon, what should be our first step in seeing ourselves as part of others, as part of a whole, rather than divided between you and me? How do we begin to really do that shift?
I have found that if you focus on any idea, where your focus is on creating something that will change the happiness of the ecosystem, for lack of a better word. Like, you know, if you want to do this California Moonshot Project, it's not about you. It's about the idea that will make a difference. Then you get all the help in the world. So at least for me, it's been a gradual realization that if you don't have a personal ego investment in the idea and it's going to make a difference, then it just gets amazing energy. So in my life, I ask myself these days 3 questions. Is it fun? It's boring. Who wants to do it? Okay. Number 2, are the people that I'm going to be with fun to be with? Are they happy people? And number 3, will it make a difference in the world? If it does, then go for it. Okay, I was yesterday mentioning to some people here that I met this interesting young man. You know, I do a little TV show in New York, and I get interesting people to just show up. And so this kid is about 28 years old. His name is David Gardonsky. He created an app, actually, it's called Anchor Free. And what he noticed, he said, when he was in school, he said to himself, when he was in college, he said, if I cannot make a difference in 1 billion people's life, I won't do it. 1 billion people. So the first thing is he made this app called Anchor Free, and what it is in those parts of the world where you can't get on the internet, when you can't get on Twitter or Facebook, where there's a lot of censorship, if you download this app from iTunes, you can be part of the social network. So actually, his app created the Arab Spring. 2 days ago, when there was a lot of unrest in Turkey, there were 1,100,000 downloads of this app in one day. And yesterday, Turkey lifted the ban, as you know that. Okay, right now we're trying to do the same thing with this kid in Venezuela. And you watch it. This is going to create a whole different mindset in the world, because nobody can suppress freedom anymore, you know, because we're all connected. Okay. Now, there are other people who are creating these technologies where you can link artisans in the world. So a woman in Afghanistan is making a shawl, and they facilitate her selling the shawl to you in Santa Barbara. So you bypass all the retailers, bypass all the distributors, right from her doorstep to your doorstep. And not only do these people make money, the people who are doing the business, but they're actually making a difference in this woman's life, in that community. And so there are lots of initiatives like this in the world. This person, did you mention Jigar Shah?
No, go ahead, mention.
So Jigar Shah is this Indian guy, Indian American. He grew up in Chicago, and he grew up learning the Gayatri Mantra. I don't know if you know the Gayatri Mantra. It's a mantra where we grow up as children, we pay homage to the sun, saying all the energy on our planet comes from the sun, right? Your food is coming from the sun's energy, photosynthesis, you eat plants and herbs, and everything is from the sun. Our life comes from the sun. So in the Vedic tradition, there's every day you do a mantra where it says, you know, praise literally to the energy of the sun. So he grew up with this idea, and he asked himself, you know, the mantra says, your energy is going to give me energy for thousands of years. And he said, so why aren't we using this energy? And he found out that, and this is while he was in college, okay? So he found out that the reason that people don't use solar energy is, number one, it's more expensive than regular fossil fuels.
It was when he started.
Huh?
It was when he started.
When he started. Yeah. It's more expensive. Two is, you know, most people, they don't have time to think about these things. They're worried about their bills, they're taking care of their children, they're not worrying about climate change, although we should be, but we don't. So what he did was he went to people and he said, if I could get you solar energy for less price than fossil fuels, and you could own your own solar plant, would you do it? If I asked you that question, if your electricity bill would be less and you owned it, would you do it? And of course they said yes. So then he went to banks and he created a financial instrument like a mortgage. Like you buy a mortgage house, you buy your plant. Well, to make a long story short, in 3 years, he sold his company, which is called Solar Edison, for a couple of $2 billion at the age of 36. He now is helping Clinton Global Initiative by creating solar, the same system, all over the world. He's written a book called
Climate Wealth.
Climate Wealth, how you can get wealthy changing the climate. Okay, and this guy is only 39 years old, is making a difference, and he's part of our California initiative right now.
He's part of the Moonshot Project.
He's part of the Moonshot Project.
In fact,
so the point is, you have to start asking yourself, what's the opportunity? And then you'll see that it'll come to you. That's what revelation is, really. Meditate, ask a question, live the question, life suddenly moves you into the answers. And don't be thinking about yourself, you know, because if you take care of others, you'll be taken care of. Thank you.
So, I want to thank all of you for coming. I have no economic interest in this next comment whatsoever, but I would love to put a commercial in for the phenomenal work that goes on down at the Chopra Center. I myself have gone to what I call meditation boot camp there. I recommend it highly. And there are enormously valuable programs that Deepak's created down there. He doesn't talk about it much, but it's something you can all do.
But more important, every 3 months, there's a free 21-day meditation challenge. How many people have done that?
With Oprah?
There you are.
Well.
So the next one is coming up in 3 weeks. Just go online, chopracentermeditation.com, and with Oprah Winfrey's help, we've reached 1 million people, and we're going to reach 2 million, and it's free. So take advantage of it.
And then the other couple of free things to keep us all talking after Deepak leaves and goes to do the next pot stirring he will in the next town tomorrow. Actually, tomorrow he's doing Nokia Theatre in LA with a really interesting project. I won't go into it. But we do something here at the Academy. Once a month we have a free meeting for people, and we urge you, if you want to know about it and come, please send us a message at info@worldbusiness.org. Easy to remember, worldbusiness.org. And we welcome you if you want to stay involved in this conversation. If you'd like to think of yourself as a citizen of Athens in the age of Pericles, what citizens did is they came to the Acropolis and talked to each other, and they shared information. So you're welcome to join us in that conversation, and it's totally free. The other thing we do is once a month we do a blog radio show, and every show we've ever done is still on file on the website. So if you go to our radio program, you'll hear the monthly show, and we never erase them because we like people to know what we said 2 and 3 years ago as well as what we said yesterday. Last but not least, there is one commercial message I really do want to leave with you before I leave you with this final little film. We really need to help you see that your shift in consciousness can help us with your support. The California Moonshot Project is only going to happen if we do literally change at the level of each of us on our own blocks. And if we work together. We need you to get involved. We can do this. We can end the threat of human civilization ending through climate change if we individually take it upon ourselves to leave a better world for our grandchildren. We can do that. And if you are moved to believe that you can help in any little way at all, your financial support is badly needed. It's really something we rely on if we're going to keep this going. And who knows what additional refunds we'll be able to win for you. But even if we don't, we'll be able to try and solve some of the more thorny and health-wise and civilization-wise more threatening questions if we all work together. I can't do it alone. Deepak can't do it alone. And none of us out there are going to be able to do it alone. But together, we can do it all. And so I want to leave you with that. I want to thank Deepak very much. As you can see, this is why we love having Deepak influence us in the Academy.